If you've just clicked in cold, Mistfall Hunters is a new fighting style PvPvE extraction game. The gods have fallen, the world's getting swallowed by the mist, and you go in, fight, loot, try to extract before it kills you. It just landed on Game Pass day 1, so a ton of you might already be thinking of jumping in right now. But with dozens of enemies and heavy particle effects on screen, the game leans hard on your CPU and GPU both. Lose a frame in the wrong moment, you lose your whole run. So let's get into exactly what keeps this smooth on the RTX 5060 laptop. By the way, just remember this is a UE5 game. I've spent hours across these tiers, multiple areas in both boss fights and open exploration. And the short version is, it's playable, it looks genuinely good for a Game Pass Day 1 title, but there are 3 specific places where it stutters and one setting that decides whether your CPU sits comfortably or runs hot enough to fry an egg. I'll show you all of it, including something I didn't expect. The game hammers your CPU way harder than it should. If you're chasing performance numbers for whatever you're planning to play next, that's basically the whole channel's moat. Hit subscribe, it helps more than you'd think. So I ran 3 combinations, same general campaign area, DX11, DLSS quality across the board, so it's a fair comparison. 1440p high settings DLSS quality, average sat around low 70s, up into the 90s, and even hundreds in lighter moments. Fine on paper, but 1% told a different story, dropping as far down as into the 40s and 50s in rougher stretches. GPU load was pinned across around 80 to 90% usage, temps climbing into the 90s sometimes. Power draw was 100 watts at max, but it genuinely stayed low. That's the 5060 working as hard as it's going to go. Now 1080p Ultra DLSS quality, here's the interesting part. Going up to Ultra but dropping the render resolution actually gave me more stable lows. 60s and 90s average this time. The 1% were around the 60s most of the time and around 70s in some readings. Instead of dipping into the 40s, GPU load also eased off a bit, down to 70% and low 80%. Is that really good? Well, it's not actually good, but we'll come into that a bit later. Ultra costs more per frame than high, but 1080p gives enough of a buffer that the frame time consistency actually improves. 1080p high settings DLSS quality is next. This one's a middle ground, generally mid 70s to low 90s, rarely touching even hundreds in lighter areas, which was actually a bit surprising. Combat effects, heavy moments are still where it dips hardest, and the other thing is once you delve into a new area, that's where it also dips for the first time. So let's give you the verdict up front right now, no fluff. If you want the best looking frame with the fewer surprises, 1080p Ultra DLSS quality is your sweet spot on the 5060 laptop. If you're chasing max resolution, you can go 1440p with high DLSS quality. Still holds up, just don't expect rock solid 1% lows. Now here's something I want you to actually test yourself. If you're playing this, the first time you walk into a new section of the map, you're going to feel the hitch. Not catastrophic, but noticeable, a little chug as things load in. I confirmed this directly. I died, respawned, and got back into the same area, Divine Retribution runes, and stutter was visibly less severe the second time through. Well, same settings and the same spot. That shader compilation and asset streaming catching up, not your hardware falling apart. Classic UE5 behavior, honestly. I've seen this same pattern in some other UE5 titles. First pass through anywhere new, expect a little roughness. After that, it smoothens out. Now, let's get into the stutter cause too, that is combat VFX overdrawn. This one's independent of your settings or which area you're in. It's about what's happening on the screen basically. Fighting the soul incubator enemies with all their particle effects, ice, frost building up. Averages held steady in the mid 70s. This was 1440p, but 1% lows fell off a cliff. 17 FPS, sometimes 35 FPS, 26 FPS, and things like that. In the exact same fight, one frame during the fight actually spiked to 88.5 milliseconds. That's a full visible freeze, not just a dip. So even if your average looks great on paper, once the screen fills up, with overlapping effects, frost, blood, magic particles, you're going to feel a stutter regardless of resolution or settings tier. That's overdraw, plain and simple. Worth knowing before you get into boss fights expecting your benchmark averages. Now the stutter cause 3. This is a section to actually stick around for. This isn't just a settings trade-off. This is the most CPU dependent behavior I've seen on this channel outside of Neo 3. Here's what I found. I pulled the actual GPU busy time versus the CPU busy numbers, not the load percentage, but the real per frame timing. Across every single test I ran, the CPU boost turned off. In every one of those samples, the CPU was taking longer per frame than the GPU. Not sometimes, every single time. From the calmest 1440p exploration all the way up to the heaviest, where the gap widened to as much as 7.5 milliseconds. That's the CPU being the actual limiter on your frame rate, not the 50-60. And here's why. With CPU boost off, the laptop hard caps the CPU at 2100 MHz on this laptop, right? The 14650HX CPU. Flat, no matter what's happening on the screen. That's roughly your base clock. It never leaves it. So I turned boost on to test the other side. At 1440p Ultra with DLSS quality, the game runs fine. I mean, near about 60 FPS. It is playable, and the CPU versus GPU gap, which I showed, basically disappears. But the CPU clock jumps to 4500 to 4700 MHz to get there, over double. And the package temp sits around 92 to 94 degrees. That is the problem with laptops, right? Not spiking there occasionally, sitting there. I checked this on the menu screen, not even in gameplay, and it was already like 91 degrees. So naturally, I tried to cap the frame rate to 60 FPS, thinking less demand means less heat. Well, it didn't work. So even if I cap the frame to 60 FPS, eventually the CPU will still reach to around 90 degrees. This is the game at DX11, so this is how it makes. One more thing I have to be upfront about, I got DX12 to launch exactly once by disabling HAGs, or hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. It never launched after that, so I cannot give you a clear picture of DX12. It's kind of like full stop. But it's worth mentioning because DX12 handles CPU work very differently from DX11, spreading draw across multiple cores, and that definitely helps bring down the temps. I can't confirm whether this would ease the CPU dependency because I couldn't get it stable enough to test properly. But until Bellring fixes DX12, treat this as a DX11 issue that might improve later, not a guarantee. So here's the honest trade-off, no sugar coating. Boost on, buttery 1440p experience at high settings, but sustained low 90s temps. Boost off, cooler and safer for your hardware long term, but you'll eat CPU bound stutters basically anywhere the game gets busy. There's no clean fix here, it's a decision you make based on how comfortable you are running your laptop hot for extended sessions. Now, best settings overall for balance: 1080p Ultra DLSS quality or balance, CPU boost off, stable 1% lows. You still feel occasional CPU bound stutters in busy areas, but it's the safest thermal profile. If you want 1440p and don't mind a bit of heat, then you can go 1440p high DLSS quality, CPU boost on, but you will run into those high temps on a laptop. On a desktop, I'm sure it'll be different. Now, DX12 is unusable at the moment for me and a bunch of people. Disabling HAGs did launch the game once, but that was only once, so that is not good enough to recommend on anything on DX12. So that's Mistfall Hunter on the RTX 5060 laptop. Playable, genuinely fun to look at, and also fun to play. But the only problem right now is that it only launched for me on DX12 properly, and even though it is on Game Pass and Steam, I saw a lot of people face the same issues. And if you're running on DX11, it means that your CPU will get pushed pretty hard on a single or 2 or 3 cores, and that's the main problem for the heat. So here's the actual question I want down in the comments. Would you run your laptop at a constant 90 to 92 degrees for smoother frames, or take the occasional stutter to keep it cooler, or add an extra cooler from outside, or do something like maybe reduce the settings, go to low or medium. I think that is one of the things you might have to do, because if you see, I have just played Mistfall Hunters just for a while, but then when you actually get into the PvP side of things and there are a bunch of people playing and you queue up for 3v3 sessions and all that with all the other enemies, the game gets extremely busy during encounters, and I don't think high and ultra will fare very well in such scenarios. So you might even have to dip into medium and low settings depending on your laptop, right? But again, remember, for desktops it might be a completely different scenario, because their CPU cooling is ample and it's extremely good compared to laptops. They are not bound in the same way as laptops are bound by thermal conditions. So it depends, but the game overall, as per me, is quite exciting.